We're continuing our quest for tabletop immortality through Godtear, looking at the different warbands, examining the champions, building some lists, making our way to Rattlebone. And before we jump into this champion, we're going to frame the narrative. We're going to frame the base tactica because Rattlebone is a great example of this concept that is really the centerpiece of any type of dice-based skirmish game. So I want to kind of frame it a little bit, and then we'll jump into the tactica. So there are things that we can control in a game, and we can't control. And we're going to look at this through the narrative of Godtear. I can control based on the cards, selecting my champion, selecting the warbands, how they move, and where they move on the table. I might be influenced with areas that are blocked off or areas that I might not be able to traverse, moving on to Godtears unless it's a champion or there's a special rule. Likewise, I can control the number of wounds and the stats and the abilities and the powers because they are static. They are based on the card. Then there are the things that I cannot control. I can only influence. We see this with the dice, being able to hit, being able to wound, being able to utilize various aspects and special powers. The dice represent the fog of war. The dice represent that interaction between champions. And we see this on a side note where in the board gaming community, many players will kind of move in a direction where they don't like dice-based games. They like Euros. They want to 100 monopolize and control everything, having everything be known. The dice adds that factor of what if? And likewise, look, we've all been there, right? You run up with Rangosh and you just roll and you miss everything. Or you roll epic and then your opponent counters it. I mean, there are those aspects that happen. But being able to influence the dice is key. How you influence the dice in a lot of war games is through the use of rerolls. You have some sort of special power that lets you reroll misses, or we see like in a system of X-Wing miniatures, certain pilots, if I roll a miss, I get to pick it up and reroll it again. If I get another miss, then I have to keep that result. In Godtear, we see this in play with the ability to push out boons and blights, positive and negative, add to armor, take away from armor. I'm not necessarily changing the dice, but in terms of good things or bad things happening to you or my warband, I get to kind of throw up modifiers that will chip away or at least add a cushion, add a buffer. So much of the game, and this is the Tactica synergy, you live and die based on this. You live and die based on this in terms of just getting off sweet combos. I mean, this is kind of Godtear 101, taking warbands that have synergy. When we hear about synergy, what that means is I run up with Rangosh. Yes, absolutely, he's going to alpha, he's going to strike. But if I can strip away some of your armor, if I can strip away some of your evade, if I can add to his power in some way, that makes it even more devastating. It builds in two buffers. First, if I roll well, I'm going to roll even better, and I'm going to crush you quicker. I'm going to move up the point ladder quicker. I'm going to get mission objectives quicker. If I don't roll that well, then that will negate out that I'll roll a little bit better based on that. So being able to throw out these boons and banes, these plus and minus, these different binary aspects to help modify and influence the dice, vital, massive. So let's jump into Rattlebone because this champion is all about the curses. This champion is all about using that hex-based magic in the narrative and really lowering opposing warbands. Now, there's a duality going on. Being a shaper, so we look at this idea, and we're going to get into the powers. Generally, if you're throwing curses around, I want to be up the entire game. I don't want to be knocked out. I want to be tier 2. You know, the idea in Godtear, tier 1 are the warbands and the tactica that they get up there and they wreck face. You know, Rangosh, even Sneaky Pete and other aspects of that. Tier 2 are, so they're right up there just wrecking things on the Godtears. Tier 2 is where you have champions that hang back a little bit and either then move in once initial warbands are weakened, or they're doing ranged attacks. Tier 3 is they're hanging back to throw out curses, to throw out buffs. At first glance, you think, all right, Rattlebone is going to be a tier 2 or ideally a tier 3. Shale is really kind of a tier 3, despite with Landslide kind of working as the bodyguard aspect of it. So we'll hang back and we'll throw out curses. But being a shaper, this is where things get interesting. Being a shaper, that means with Rattlebone, I need to be claiming every single turn. I want that nice little +1 bonus on the track. I need that every turn. Now, in some missions, an example like Life, as we move into turn 2 or turn 3, if I'm behind, I can start chaining the Godtears back towards my deployment zone, not into it, and then have my tier 1s claiming that first aspect and have Rattlebone kind of hanging back, planting, and cursing. That is true. But I will say, without making judgment, that's a losing strategy. The mission Life and all the missions are so well balanced to give you a tight game, but I'd rather be winning and be up on the points track, be getting those gold coins on the track, than I lost and I get to try to influence and now place a Godtear. I'll let you place all the Godtears. I want the points. But that is a viable strategy. What this leads to ideally, Rattlebone, and then this is going to get into the Hexlings and the other powers, we want to play Rattlebone in a warband, a multi-champion warband. Yes, you can do one-on-one. And one-on-one is not just for introductory games. I've played a lot of one-on-one games, random draft, where you pick 3 champions, I pick 3 champions. We keep them secret. And then from that, you figure out, okay, we do 3 rounds. This round, who do you want to play? And then we deploy and we move out. So there's that unknown. And you can play these games very quick. They're very decisive. They can be a little bit one-sided depending on who you pick, but that's the nature of the game. In that aspect of 1 to 2 warbands, there's just not enough for Rattlebone to be able to throw the curses, but at the same time claim and act as a champion. In the higher level warbands where maybe you play 3, 4, or even more, and I'm not opposed to custom games, this is where Rattlebone really, really shines. Because now you have enough literally models on the table that you can wall off and protect her, but at the same time throwing up those hexes becomes massive, especially if you pair Shapers with Slayers and kind of push from that perspective. Becomes very, very, very powerful. So the more the game scales up, the more powerful it becomes, just based on absolute synergy. That's the framework. Now let's kind of get into the tactica. If we're looking at the Hexlings are interesting because by themselves, they don't have any alpha. They're not putting out any damage. They're completely curse throwers, which is why if you're doing a one-on-one warband, Hexlings are at a massive, massive disadvantage because you're going to get them up there to throw the hexes, but they can't effectively counterattack. You're going to kill my followers. You're going to get the +1 based on that. You could see one-on-one doesn't quite work. But if we're higher up, if we're playing more warbands, where if I have Rangosh, Sneaky Pete, Slayers on that front tier line pushing, and I've got Rattlebone and Hexlings behind that throwing those curses, the Hex Bolt throwing up a blight is massive. And the fact that you get to kind of pick your blight, it's not limited. A lot of powers will be throw up this blight, pick one or the other. This throws it out. That's huge. So to be able to throw that aspect out is very, very potent, is very, very powerful, especially with chaining with Rattlebone. To be able to remove Hexlings and place them means mobility and range is almost everywhere. It also provides later on kind of a safe way to do it where you can activate your Hexlings, move them up, or let's say they're already moved up actually. So you moved your Hexlings up, you throw out the curses, and then you use Rattlebone to pull them back. Then next turn you move them up, you pull back. So the movement goes both ways. It can get you into a place to throw them. It can also get you out of a place to throw them. Very, very interesting. And of course, amazing looking models, just animated by this hex magic. Everything about Godtear just captures the imagination. So moving into Rattlebone herself, the stats aren't actually that bad. And that makes her a lot more resilient than you might think. Being 336 is good evade, good armor, decent life, working on that aspect. That gives you a little bit of padding. I don't want to get attacked. I don't want to get hit with her. But if I do, I could at least take one round and then move out and get out of there and redeploy. But again, her primary ability is to remove those hexlings and to place them and then throw them out, which again makes sense. Controlling the hex magic and pushing that out, controlling it out. So she's a completely support type model, scales incredibly with multiple warbands. The one other place that you might get in trouble, and by in trouble I mean becomes a little bit harder to play, often what we see is we scale up in multiple warbands. Anything that can curse or hex or throw out boons and blights, positive, negatives, you only want to take one of that champion in your roster. I have played multiple hex type builds, and they're kind of fun, and it's a lot to throw around, but it just doesn't have enough focused on slayers and secondary support. Curses are nice, but you don't need that many to turn the tide of the game by influencing the dice.